Okay, so welcome to the 10th Capital Projects Working Group meeting for the year. Can people see my screen or not yet?
Not yet.
Yeah.
All right, try it again. How about now?
There we go.
Okay, so we sort of standing agenda today. We're going to do some sub-team updates, and then Alan's going to give us an update on the OIE pilot, and as time allows, we're going to discuss our 2022 priorities. So just a reminder that the meeting minutes and recordings are out on the web if you want to review a meeting that you've missed or invite someone else to catch up. And with that, we'll start. Oh, does anyone else have anything you want to add to the agenda before we start? Okay. So Luke, I guess you're doing the update for the cost estimating sub-team?
Yeah. Let me, do you mind if I share my slides?
Nope, no, go ahead.
Change.
Go ahead.
It's small change. You guys see that okay?
Yeah, we can see it.
Cool. So just as a recap, over the summer, we had a small group of folks getting together and basically trying to figure out where to start with building out the user stories. And we kind of agreed that let's do a little homework and try and figure out if there are some standards that we can leverage to at least start us off. And this is just a recap of the user story themes that we came up with, but basically a lot of it has to do with structuring data that goes into and feeds an estimate, either from the actual sort of the raw data to being able to sort of empower gatekeepers and estimators doing reviews to be able to more effectively validate takeoffs and those types of things. And so what we did is we did a little research and looked around to see what we might use that could, instead of having to reinvent the wheel, basically kick us off so that we're mostly just sort of fleshing out the details. And what we settled on was basically the sort of the work process flows of AACEs from AACE. This comes from their total cost management framework. And what we've actually done more recently, Alan and Martin, who were on the team, went out and worked with AAC to get approval that we could, in fact, use this for our purposes. And it is high level. I don't know, those of you that are familiar with AAC or the cost management framework, it is sort of high level, but it was comprehensive enough that we thought this would be a good basis to use as we're starting to think through all of the data flows and identifying the key functions and the key activities that are going to happen that would influence our user stories. So we identified this. AAC said it's okay to use it. And so that was a pretty good start, at least in terms of mapping the way the different activities and the way the different input sources. So the next thing we did is we identified effectively a data dictionary, if you will, for cost accounts. This is the ICMS. It's an open source cost of accounts or code of accounts that lists all of the different, or not everything, but it has a pretty granular setup that allows us to identify all of sort of the key data that we would ultimately need to identify in fleshing out the user story. So this one's nice. It's open source. We don't really have to go through and get any approvals. So, but anyways, it took the greater part of the summer to nail these down and identify sort of what the starting point was going to be for us to actually go and build the user stories. We've done that now. And so the next step will be to actually flesh them out. You know, this is the example that we've shown on a number of presentations, but basically our intent is to go back and do a couple of those user stories following this framework and leveraging those two sources I described to get us basically all the way down to creating sort of a map like this. And the idea is that, and we have, not to keep flipping around on you, but there's actually a fifth. We have 5 user stories that we're going to carve out. They're rank ordered. And so the goal for us is to spend the next month or so piloting 1 or 2 of these that will, in our smaller group. We do have a smaller group that's been sort of meeting more regularly to work these. Try out, pilot a couple of these, bring it back to our larger estimating group for feedback and sort of review, see how that goes before we move on to the next ones. Any questions on that?
So Luke, about when do you think you'll be going back to the larger group? And getting
Well, we're
people
going to
caught
meet,
up?
we'll still meet with the larger group monthly, but it's just that the smaller group will meet more frequently than that. And we've sort of set it up so that the smaller group has the action to carve out some more of the details in the user stories and then feed that back to the larger group for review.
Okay. So does everyone on the phone have the right person identified to work with that so that you get the advantages of that as quickly as possible, or is that an action we need to follow up on? Do you have your cost estimating folks involved as appropriate? I'm going to assume yes, unless I hear from you guys, I guess.
We
Any
got
other
a pretty
questions
good
for
group,
Luke?
both in the smaller section and then in the larger group. So I think we're certainly welcoming anybody who would like to participate. So to the extent, one of your estimating group is not a participant, feel free to invite them or forward the details on it, and we'd be happy to get their feedback and opinions.
Okay. Kramjit?
Yes. Hello, everyone. The facility for purchasing use case, we have been making steady progress on the use case. The process itself is kind of finalized now. The scenarios have been identified. The scenarios in light orange color is the ones we have identified, but we are not detailing them for the initial piloting. The one in green is something we already have piloted before, so that's something we would be just reusing. The scenarios that are written in the red, the publish request for quotation and the corresponding response, and the push purchase order scenario and the corresponding response. So that is what we are doing right now in the team, is we are detailing those scenarios, especially around the data content, what will be sent in them, which fields, and what will be sent back. So in an effort for doing that, we looked around on what existing standards we can leverage. So we had to look at the AWP data requirements, the OAGS requirements that are out there, as well as there's another ISO standards around procurement, universal business language. So today we had a look at those standards and the data fields in there. Mostly the fields in there are more from procurement point of view and more into administrative aspect. But once we have finalized those, then we will go into the engineering details. That's what team has decided to go forward. We had a very good session today where we were within the team, we are able to finalize on which fields are must, which one is optional, and so on. We were able to finalize for request for quotation, and purchase order is almost halfway done. So we'll continue doing that. And in the subsequent calls, we'll focus on what all engineering information will be accompanied as well. The next step from here would be generating the example data sets and do the piloting, hopefully very soon. So that is where we are at. Any questions, comments, suggestions? So just quickly, on the right side of the slide is the detailing part of the why scenario, and where we are right now is the system actors are, of course, identified the data content. And of course, then if we are referencing an existing reference data, then reference types and the events and data formats, that's more details. But right now we're at point 2 where we are identifying the data content. Okay, that's all from my end, Deb.
Okay, any questions? So good progress, good.
Okay, thanks.
Matt?
Thanks, Deb. So yeah, just for those if you don't remember or haven't seen it before, wow, everything just
Try
reset.
to make it bigger, sorry.
Except I think it's on the wrong screen. So now we're seeing the presenter's view.
Sorry about that. Let me go back up. There we
But
go.
it doesn't matter too much. People will be able to see the process in workflow in more detail when they get a copy, or it's accessible on the Teams anyway. But basically, what we're doing with the capital asset installation use case is focusing on this idea of an AWP style installation work package being issued to the field as the trigger, that being sort of registered on the local backlog for the work crew and turned into sort of work orders at that level, going through the process of actually performing that work, checking it off, any pre-checks, post-checks, finalization, and status updates that monitor the progress of that work package as it's being worked on. And there's sort of two aspects of that. There's the internal sort of status updates on a daily basis, and then also the larger sort of not larger, but the status updates going back to the work phase planner type aspect as well, to who's also monitoring the progress of the package. So that's kind of what the use case is about. As part of that, we've identified a bunch of scenarios for that. Most of them are sort of placeholders for the moment, and there's 3 that we'll sort of focus on, apart from the ones that were sort of already done previously. Will be in the current pilot, the ones we're focusing on are the issuance scenario. So that's the actual taking of that work package as what we're doing is mapping it to MIMOSA CCOM work request data structure. So that gets sent across, can be captured by a work management system, for example, turned into work orders and scheduled at the local level. And then the 2 status update scenarios as well as what we'll include in the pilot as well. They're much simpler. Basically take the work status and just publish those changes as the occurrences, as they happen, basically. So a little bit simpler at that side. And then, so you can just go to the next slide for me. Yeah, thank you. So what I'm then working on at the moment is basically mapping the AWP data requirements for installation work packages to the MIMOSA CCOM data structures, and developing some reference data for that as well where necessary. Otherwise, mapping it into existing reference data where that is currently available. And then once I've done that, I'll be generating an example data set for the pilot as well. So I've currently mapped the majority of sort of some of the 3 core sets of data requirements for the installation work package, the work steps, and the execution information. And there's about, I think it was 6 other sets of data requirements that need mapping as well. And then I'll be able to generate that reference data that I've identified as part of that mapping and create that example data set. So yeah, so that's where that's at the moment and where it's heading. Anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to make?
So Matt, is there anything you need, or are you pretty good shape for what you are trying to accomplish this year?
I think we're in good shape. Everyone's been giving really good feedback and information in my work team, so I'm really happy.
All right. Questions for Matt? Okay, so we're 2 out of 3 close to being able to push things into the pilot, and one starting to frame up the cost estimating one. So good progress. Thank you to the sub-team leaders. So Alan's going to give us an update on the pilot status. Alan?
All right. Let me see if I can share my screen. So this is going to be an update on pilot status and sort of an overall framing, hopefully, of a business value proposition around what we're doing as we start to come to the end of this year and go in the next year. Like most other not-for-profit associations, we're sort of in membership drive and sponsorship modality so that we can keep this process moving and hopefully actually even accelerate it based on collaboration and federation and bringing together multiple other activities that are often taking place in silos for more business value. So an overall process map, this may not always be totally visible or totally obvious to people working in the individual sub-teams here, is that everything that we are doing is getting threaded together, ultimately to build OIIE use cases, and those use cases then are used to drive out functional and business requirements that also pull in updates to the other standards and specifications that form the open industrial interoperability ecosystem. So rather than simply taking a random approach to going, oh boy, there's a whole bunch of standards, why don't we try to use them? We've tried to keep this very much focused on what's the actual business purpose, what's the actual function that we're trying to accomplish, particularly for people working on digital transformation or industrial digital transformation, to be more specific, in asset lifecycle management. And we feel like if we keep doing that, number one, we can try to help bring people together who are trying to do digital transformation on their own. And it's almost impossible for individual enterprises or organizations, no matter what their scale, to do digital transformation on their own. There are a tiny handful that have been able to pull it off because they're so massive. They just, levy mandates on all their supply chain partners, and they have no choice. But for the vast majority of the rest of the world, there has to be some sort of more collaborative process where it's seen to have a mutually beneficial approach that people can share. And so that's a lot of what we're trying to do. And hopefully you're seeing that in each of the sub teams where we're referencing standards and practices developed by other groups and starting to bring them in and saying, how can we really use these with each other in, a proper and mutually beneficial way so that everybody can get more business value out of them. So as we work this process flow, and this is the simplified version of it, there are more detailed versions that the technical committees work on and that Matt and Karamjit and Bon will be using in their individual sub teams. But capturing requirements is a lot of what we've been doing in these sub team meetings. And again, that's a very interactive kind of process. And it's, it's capture and then figure really out how to socialize them, have mutual understanding of those requirements, and then how to document them in a way that mutual understanding is carried forward so that it can actually be used in a consistent way. Because once again, so many of these activities are interdependent. And, these are things that take massive amounts of time and money if each organization tries to do it on their own. And further, if each organization does it on their own and they're all getting pulled in a dozen different directions, then, it's almost impossible. So, the requirements capture and documentation process is something, again, that we've been doing in an ongoing basis here. Now for quite a while, and building up in preparation for a phase of the pilot that we're currently in, which is phase 3.3. Where the initial aspects of these requirements are actually flowing into preliminary OIIE use cases that or updating existing ones, where again, those are taken down to what we call a fully dressed level, where it actually specifies the standard APIs, the standard data models, the standard data wrappers, and the use of the standard registers and directories, so that ultimately this is a full up digital services set of specifications for digital transformation. As we close out this phase of the pilot, those requirements are going to be seen to be used. Okay. Now, again, the ones in the cost estimating section, because that's the area really we're finally just able to truly get into the meat and potatoes. We won't be able to include that in 3.3, but the work streams that Karamjit and Matt have been leading, you will see substantial amounts of things that have been getting discussed there, starting to show up in 3.3 and then carrying forward on into 3.4. Once we actually gain the necessary alignment and get enough detail that we can at least use the agile process in the pilot as well to go, okay, this was our best understanding. Here it is. We're showing it to you in an actual use environment. Is this what you meant? So these are the sorts of activities that have normally been done only inside individual organizations, where again, it becomes extremely costly and high risk, the aggregate cost as well as the individual cost. So by pulling these out and sharing the cost and risk, and then the business value, what we really hope we're able to do is share, and save a massive amount of the cost and risk, while actually gaining a lot more business value by being able to have these conversations together. You still may have to ultimately do an internal pilot for that final 10 or 20% of how do your organization adopt the OIIE. But, we ought to be able to peel off at least 80%. That's our objective, is to share 80% of that work across the industry, and then get a lot more business value out of it and accelerate the process. So 3.3 is right now in here iterating and starting to build up. Yeah, here it is. So by this time next month, there will be a substantial amount of demonstrated ability out there based on the work that's been taking place. That will get showcased. Generally, we run these things live fire and then record them. So there are recordings out on the Mimosa website associated with phase 3.1 and 3.2, if people would care to pull them up. Where then this gives us the ability to have a feedback loop where people can look at it and go, is this what I really hoped, to be accomplishing? Oh, okay, I see what that's doing, but it needs to be a little different in order for me to really be able to use it, I think. And, seed those sorts of discussions, which then wind up flowing on into the next phase of the pilot. So we just keep iterating on this in an agile way. We do peel off periodically specifications out of this once we think things are good enough and locked down that we have broad enough consensus. We peel this off and generate what are called technical reports in ISO lingo. And this is the official input process then for ISO 18101. Now, also, as we start to exit pilot stages, sometimes we're going to reach the point that we're good enough that people can start to go, aha, we can actually put this into production in the really near future. So for some people, there may be some things that can be put in production, at least limited production, at the end of the phase 3.3. But what we really feel like is phase 3.4, we're going to be trying to button up a lot of the other loose ends so that we hit, I'm going to call it minimum viable specification rather than minimum viable product in the case of standardization, but minimum viable specification that allows minimum viable products, plural, to be built that are simply implementations of these standards that allow then the various other applications and systems that everyone is using to be tied together in an interoperable system of systems. So as I say, this is the overall flow that we're looking at, and there's been a lot of work in here, and now we actually believe we're at this point. Some people perhaps at the end of 3.3, but we hope a lot of people at the end of 3.4 will be able to go, it may not be perfect, but it's good enough. It's already better than anything I've got. We're going to go ahead and pull this in and start adopting it and directly using it in terms of, yeah, this is how we have interoperability as our basis for moving forward with digital transformation. So again, another way of looking at that is to say, all right, objectively, what are we seeking to do here? So, all right, we all know all these buzzwords, right, that everybody's talking about: digital twins, digital services. We probably helped drive more conversation recently about system of systems, oriented interoperability, AI, ontology, open technical dictionaries, etc. So those are sort of business and functional objectives as well as tools. They sort of all get mixed in together when people are talking about digital transformation. So the OIIE is really coming out of a R&D program, and R&D program, as I was just describing earlier and showing, is driven by the pilot. And in fact, the pilot then ultimately reaches back to a variety of working groups, of which this is a major one for us, which again, we thank our friends at IPA for helping to organize and maintain, that really takes a programmatic approach to this, building up the use cases. And then again, those use cases over here wind up driving out all these underlying specifications and standards that are sort of the technical framework, the technical enabling framework for interoperability that supports these functional and business requirements that the various sub-teams are actually working on. And again, we have this integrated approach where we do it in the OIIE, take it through the pilot, and that becomes also input to ISO 18101. The main business value for doing that, and we believe there is significant business value in taking the work to ISO, is it gives you something that is enforceable under international contract law. And that's so that if you're 80% along the way of doing stuff yourself, and suddenly you run into one particular group that for whatever reason says, no, we're not going to do that, and you can't make us, well, actually at some point it can become a condition of contract where you can go, well, no, this is an ISO standard and we really need you to do it. And it essentially gets around any of the other sorts of issues where a small supplier might say a big supplier or a big operator, can't force them to do something from an antitrust point of view. So this becomes what's called a safe harbor collaboration. And it's also the reason we're trying to work with suppliers of all scales, small and mid-size in particular, to say, okay, let's do this in a way that's truly mutually beneficial. We're not trying to hurt anyone. We're trying to help everyone gain from this process. So again, that's sort of a, macro way of looking at it. Now, once again, this implies there's a lot of, other activities. There's a lot of other work. I have not yet added AACE to this chart, but this is actually one Deb asked me to pull together now. Closing in on 2 years ago, about 1 3/4 ago, to say, okay, can you at least give us a picture of what most of the pieces of the puzzle are that are out there related to the conversation? So over on the left-hand side, we have all the industry level associations and standards that are most closely related to this topical area of, again, of asset lifecycle management and digital transformation for that. And we have formal MOUs in place with quite a number of these groups. And so in particular, ones that either have green backgrounds, or in this case, also have arrows flowing in. We have formal MOUs with all those groups. The entire group here in the middle is collectively called Open O&M, and we all have a multi-party MOU with each other that goes back to 2007. So at least this group of industry organizations and industry standards developing organizations realized, 13, 14 years ago that we were going to have to work with each other to try to allow people to use our standards together with each other to achieve interoperability. To be totally honest, that's not always been easy. I'm going to say by far the strongest cooperation is up here at the top three, where it's Mimosa and ISA and MESA, who have, I think, started to see that there's a great deal of benefit in doing this. We also tend to be groups who work mutually with both ISO and IEC. And so that helps everybody, again, when it's a pre-aligned process for getting there, which is what we have, again, as this work comes together, comes down through the OIIE, goes through the pilot that we're going to be talking more about. In particular, this is the OIIE OGI pilot, and that winds up flowing once things are conformance tested and validated here. Those specifications wind up flowing into ISO 18101 through ISO Technical Committee 184 Working Group 6, which is interoperability for asset-intensive industries. I happen to convene that working group, and it's interesting because it's directly under a technical committee, and that's because we are trying to use it to federate a whole series of activities together with each other, once again, for interoperability purposes. These are other key ISO and IEC standards and technical committees and the subcommittees that are actually an integral part of this process. And ultimately, a lot of this also comes together in ISO IEC Joint Working Group 21, which is smart manufacturing. Task Force 8 is their team on digital ecosystem and digital twin, and they have specifically already identified Mimosa, the OIIE, and ISO 18101 as key standards that are relevant to the process of digital transformation for smart manufacturing. The phases of the pilot, again, this has been going on for a while. There have been previous phases and a 1X series and a 2X series. Some of those we did on our own. Then starting in the early part of this century, we did work with Fiatech in the 2.x series of the pilots. So some of the people here are familiar with that work, which again, a lot of that was taking place in 2007 through about 2011 or 12. And then we started moving to the 3.x series as we were getting a whole series of updated specifications from various collaborating groups with us, all of which we're now starting to move towards formal use of terms like digital transformation. So we saw, all right, it made sense to do that. We were updating some of our own specifications and standards. And then we kicked off the new series with phase 3.1 back in 2018. And, this was obviously, we didn't know COVID was going to pop up. We were all really excited about progress we were going to make. We started building a lot of momentum through phase 3.1. And then as we rolled into phase 3.2, we had really a large group of operators and suppliers of all types together going, yep, let's just keep moving this forward. As a matter of fact, let's pick up the pace. And then COVID hit, last January and February, and suddenly everything really slowed down. So it's been, difficult for everybody, right? Not just industry. It's difficult for people, their families, during the ensuing period, but we have managed to keep going forward. It slowed us down. It cost us a full year in terms of our timeline objectives. But we are in phase 3.3 now. So we were able to go ahead and get through phase 3.2, move into phase 3.3. What you're starting to see here, in addition to what we're doing in this specific working group, is again alignment with CFOS related activities, as well as activities led by Construction Industry Institute. And you're starting to see some of their initial specifications and requirements being pulled in and aligned with each other. Because again, unfortunately, it seems like almost everybody is working in silos. So, we're really trying to use this activity in a line and federation sort of way to go, all right, we want to use these, standards and specifications that are being developed by others that people are agreeing are best practices. And we want to use them in a consistent way so that people can do digital transformation. We are, as we do this work, adding more specifications for what we call the OIE primary components. So those are things that we're doing particularly in conjunction with the other open O&M members. So these are updates in a lot of cases to standard APIs, standard registers, standard directories, while the use cases themselves, again, are getting driven out through the various working groups. And a key thing that you guys may not be aware of, but that has been an ongoing driver for us, is the development of what are called managed industry clusters. And these are things that are popping up all over the world, particularly hearing them in context like hydrogen clusters, but they're being used in many other industries. And so the idea is these are interoperating networks where the network is, again, not simply a single member of industry or industry participant, but it is in fact that industry participant and the ecosystem of other businesses that they routinely need to interoperate with in order to support a larger aggregated set of capabilities. And these things become very multidimensional because of the fact that most suppliers have many different operators and they won't all be in the same cluster, and vice versa. Most operators have lots of suppliers who span these many clusters. So having a standards-based interoperability backbone to do that seems to be the only practical way to do it. And it also gets us beyond the war between, what you need is a hub, which is hub and spoke architecture, which is what we've been trying to avoid ever since we built the internet, versus just sheer, point-to-point network connection chaos and risk. So the idea of a managed cluster is the hybrid between that, which is hopefully the best of both worlds. So all this other work you're seeing take place in the individual sub-teams here, this is also getting folded into, how do all of you industry participants interoperate with each other in this context of these managed industry clusters, which is where a lot of the business value comes from, again, so that you're not trying to do this on your own, but that there's, a pre-existing way laid out that you and your various business partners can all interoperate with each other and do that with safety and security, also taking cyber risk and other types of risk into account. We're getting ready to move into 3.4. So as soon as we wrap up 3.3, which I'm going to show the quick update on that, That'll be coming to close at the end of next month. We're actually already queuing up and collecting the requirements for phase 3.4, which we do intend to start in November. Again, this has been a high stress year. We know we've lost time, but a lot of our effort here is to go ahead and really help people get out of just doing requirements capture and documentation, that move into actual internal adoption and use of the things that you're now able to start to see being used, in a real tangible context in this pilot, so that it's not just static specifications, it's not just PowerPoints, it's no, here's how you actually use it, as if it's a simulation of a real thing, like an internal pilot would be, but something that we've genericized and lifted up in a way that everybody can share and everybody can collaborate with each other. So again, we have a series of working groups, as well as a series of other organizations that we have various forms of MOUs with, that we are trying to federate these activities together so that there's a, again, standard and efficient way of using them for digital transformation. I've already mentioned most of the others, then, now once again, we're starting to include AACE in this, which we think is going to be really important over the long haul, so that we have a really solid basis for linking the cost estimating and cost tracking into all these other digital activities, without requiring, totally independent ways of thinking about this, and, independent work teams trying to do this on your own in every industry participant organization that's out there. It's also pretty critical that we have this cross-sector alignment for critical infrastructure risk management. Again, we've all figured out, I think, how interdependent we are. When something like the Colonial Pipeline has gone down, this is going to keep happening, unfortunately. And, there is real work being done now on this, and we're part of that real work with governments in the United States and Australia and Britain in particular, which we're part of the Five Eyes nations. That's also called the Critical Five Nations. So we share a common interest in critical infrastructure and the risk management thereof. And then, of course, all industry participants are interdependent on much of this critical infrastructure as well. So, and the only way we can do what's needed there, again, is to use appropriate standards. We've already discussed the technical reports, but really the key things then are, once again, it's a shared cost, risk, and benefit model. So if you're, like I say, most people are used to doing this in silos. It's really expensive. It's really time consuming, and it's pretty much impossible to do industry digital transformation in those silo-centric ways. By aligning also with the Future Energy Exports Cooperative Research Center, which is based in Australia, but actually has US members and Japanese members and Korean members as well, we're actually able to get a force multiplier effect on our R&D funding. So people like Matt and Karamjit are actually funded through that activity. When we fund through them, we actually get matching funds from the Australian government and the universities themselves that are participating, as well as other industry participants. So that's a really key value proposition of working this way, that, we're, able to get at least a 2x and sometimes close to a 3x force multiplier effect on our R&D funding. So, we can't do everything for nothing, but we can be very efficient and do an awful lot with a relatively limited amount of funding by working in this collaborative way, and then leveraging the CRC in particular for our underlying mechanism. And finally, again, I had identified that our real objective for 3.4, beyond all the other just continuous iterative things, is to get people to the point that they can actually go to internal production pilots for that last little 10 or 20%, and then on into production use in mid-2022 and beyond. All right, so you guys have all seen this slide, I think, many times. And so, again, if it were to change, you would actually know we had a problem. Thankfully, we're not having to change it. So this is sort of the visual layout of what we're actually doing in phase 3.3. And in particular, we did get alignment and permission to use CFOS logo here because of some of the CFOS inclusions in it, but it's also starting to add in and include initial elements of AWP, particularly the IWP work. So in Matt's group, you would be most aware of that. The CFO stuff affects Matt and Karamjit's group. And so, again, as we work across the life cycle, though, Karamjit's been leading the work streams around what might more broadly be called procurement. But we had agreed that we would just try to focus on a single new use case of purchasing that would get inserted in here. But as we're doing this work, we're also collectively modeling, and Karamjit's leading that team to say, what does that overall procurement process look like so that we can have best alignment on the most efficient ways of doing it, certainly here in a capital project context, but it turns out that probably 80% of the things we're doing in capital project transfer to the entire life cycle, so that you will keep reusing many of the same specifications and can therefore also reuse many of the same software widgets over and over again throughout the asset life cycle. And that's a particularly important and powerful part of working this way. As it moves from, that work into the capital project asset installation and then the simulated handover, that's a bit, particularly the asset installation one's more in Matt's team, sub-team, the focus there. That's where you're seeing the linkages more to the IWP, sort of being a wrapper or envelope around individual capital project work orders that are still cut and managed at that detail level by generally a work management system of some sort, whether that be SAP, which a lot of people are using, or Maximo or Infor across the whole asset lifecycle, or if people have a dedicated construction work management system, they still work in a common enough way, and Mimosa's the group that sort of led that activity across industry to say, all right, how can we, again, get these common specifications so that we can share them? In the pilot right now, we are principally focusing on and using SAP simply because it seems to have the largest market share of any one of the applications or ERP systems that's out there. So you'll be seeing that used as the target system, SAP PM and SAP Material Master. So when things are getting handed over and provisioned, they wind up going in there. And then once that's done, we're going to flow right on into simulated condition-based maintenance and remove and replace operations, which will be able to see where firms that do diagnostic and prognostic and analytics work will be able to use the OIIE framework to take a look at what's going on, in this case, in a condenser system that's part of a fractionating tower. And in that condenser system, there are these key components. Again, there's an electric motor where the spec's coming in here. There's also a tube fin heat exchanger. And there are other parts of it as well that we're incrementally building up, the instruments, the pumps, et cetera, that allow this to be moved through. And, ultimately what we're doing is we're picking up and carrying all the information that would be in a P&ID, but doing it in a supplier neutral way for digital transformation. And over time, we're also adding in all the other things that would be in your line list, the PFD information, et cetera, everything that's needed for digital transformation. This process, when we work this way, is allowing all the twins to be built. So we get the as engineered twins, the as designed twins, and the as built twins show up here. And then, once we're into operations and maintenance, by having an event-driven mechanism for actually keeping these things up to date. So we have an event-driven mechanism to get them up to date at the outset, hand them over in a synchronized way. This allows us to keep these twins up to date and synchronized with each other on an event-driven basis. And again, we believe that's a critical requirement for digital transformation to actually take place. So this is it pictorially. And I know we're running out of time, so I'm just going to click down really, really quickly and go, yep, the sprints are completing. The real focus here, again, is on this collaboration and providing a safe harbor for doing the work. And the key thing is, yeah, we do have a lot of collaborations out there. We do need to join. We do need to get some more members in and some more pilot sponsorship in as we go forward, particularly with phase 3.4 and beyond. So sorry, Deb, I actually went a little longer than I intended to, but I think that's it.
Any questions for Alan? I think the key for me is things are actually starting to move forward in a way,
Yes.
in an organized, collaborative way, and I think more and more organizations are seeing the need to collaborate. So hopefully,
And adopt. Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully you can step back from this, see what your organization needs, and decide how to continue to stay engaged. The question that this team will have next month is, we're supporting 3 use cases now, or 3 areas of interest. Do we have the resources to add a couple more in 2022? And if so, which ones are the higher priority? So that's what I had. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts? I think consider membership, just because right now money that we can contribute to the effort gets met by the Australian government, and that says you get more for your buck. So.
Yep. And further, again, it's sets of use cases. So what I would say is collectively, we're already probably involved in about 6 use cases, Deb, in this group that we identified. But focused in 3 topical areas is what I would say, right? The sort of that, again, the beginning of the project stuff around cost estimating, which will have probably several use cases itself. The area around procurement that Karamjit's leading mid-project, and then the area around the actual construction and adding in, capital project asset installation, and then of course handover at the end, which everybody's interested in. So it's a series of interrelated use cases where the use cases get to a sufficient level of detail that they're actual digital services specifications.
Okay, you've been a quiet group this morning. Any questions?
Yeah, Deb. Last year we talked a little bit about kind of the barriers to participation from subject matter experts, participation in this team, and kind of where do we stand on that? Are we pretty good in terms of kind of the non-IT people involvement? Or
I think so. I think the key for me is, are the right people, and within your companies and stuff, are the right people aware of the conversation and participating? I think it's, if we truly want to get to implementing after the pilot, probably mid next year, then again, who in your organization needs to be aware of it? So we could start now, right?
Right, but in terms of direct involvement with this team, it's not really a goal.
Yeah, no, well, direct involvement, at least at the sub-team level, I think is definitely a goal. Whether the value is for this progress update, them to hear the progress update once a month, your call. But I think getting them involved in the sub-team level definitely is appropriate.
No, I would agree, and I'm just wondering if you have kind of a feel for how much involvement we have from SMEs at that level.
I don't know, Matt Karamjit. I mean, we intentionally went after some cost estimating SMEs that we were aware of, because we wanted to make sure we got that on that sub team. But Matt and Karamjit, would you like more technical input?
Yeah, any expertise is appreciated. I do have participation from Sarawak Energy Malaysia, GGC Corporation, Dow Chemicals USA, and Church from Canada. So we got participation from big organizations and SMEs. But if John, you or any team person from your team can help us, that will be excellent.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're always open, right, to more, particularly if you have independent SMEs, right? Which may be your case, John. The SMEs, knowledge is where you find it, right? And so, we tend to get people that their companies are paying them a salary in order to try to get things done, and they're starting to see there's business value in this approach of collaborating. But yeah, individual SMEs as well then are always welcome. And certainly I think the cost estimating group is a really good example, but actually all of them are, most of the time has been going into collecting the functional and business requirements. We actually have a good core tech team, which Karanjit and Matt are part of, along with Vaughn. So, again, we're always open to more there as well, but the functional and, business people who can describe what it is that needs to be done and sign off on it in a way that, okay, I see how to use this and I see how it will support what I'm trying to accomplish. That's a big part of this. As a matter of fact, that's sort of the guts, again, of how we build the use cases.
So we're over time. Maybe Deb, I'll talk to you a little bit more about this offline. So
Okay.
all right. Thanks.
All right. Everybody have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.